It is a beautiful day in western Colorado. My name is Sheila Reiner, and I am the former clerk and recorder for the County of Mesa, State of Colorado. In Colorado, one of the duties of the clerk and recorders is to administer elections. In my county, there are term limits even on the administrative positions like clerk. I served my 2 terms, and before that, I worked in the elections division itself. During my time in office, I served on the executive board for the Colorado County Clerks Association and many legislative committees. My story today is about the election reform in the state of Colorado. There are 3 pieces to conducting an election. There is registration, so that is the building and the maintenance of a list on who is eligible to vote at which elections and for what candidates and ballot issues. There's the conduct, and that is the way that your government offers you the opportunity to access a ballot and then cast it. Then there's the actual tabulation of the election, which is the counting of the votes and the reporting of the results. I give you this base terminology because as I walk through the dramatic changes in election conduct over the last 20 years in the state of Colorado, these 3 things can often get melded together. So I'll talk about them one at a time. 20 years ago, registration was required at least 30 days prior to each election. The conduct was done by precinct polling location, that is a location close to your home and inside the precinct that you live in. In those precincts, we had printed poll books that you had to check in with an election judge, and hopefully your name was on the list. If you'd thought ahead of time, you could have asked for an absentee ballot even back then, but you had to think ahead of time. So if election day came, your choice was to be present near your home from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. on a Tuesday. The tabulation was done by punch card. Behind me is a picture of a punch card being scrutinized in a Florida election. Now, you may remember the turmoil, or if you're very young, you can certainly go read about the turmoil surrounding the presidential election of 2000. Now, Colorado never experienced a meltdown like this over the punch card system, but I can tell you by stories told by my predecessors that it wasn't the most accurate system. Often those perforated chads would fly off as the cards ran through the tabulators. So you can imagine that if you needed to go back and recount them or audit them for accuracy after the election was over, your results might not match. This is a typical polling place line. It looks like it's in a public building. One of the other challenges we had with the model that we employed 20 years ago was that polling locations, there were so many of them. We needed 82 in this county alone. So we used every public building available to us, and there was conflicts with scheduling because other entities have to do business on Tuesdays as well. We also used almost every single school building, and that caused security issues for our children. Parading voters through schools were not the most secure way for the schools to conduct classes and to have children present. We often used outlying community centers, which may not have been ADA accessible and may not have been accessible to all. So those are some of the challenges, but on top of that, having precincts near people's homes in a society that mostly works outside the home caused long lines at the end of the days. If you had to vote in your precinct, you often went after work, so the lines got long after 5 p.m. This caused late night returns. And as an election administrator, I can tell you that that was very stressful. And you only want the news media to be covering the candidates and the ballot issues the next day, not mistakes made in the conduct of the election. So that's where we were 20 years ago. Then federal legislation passed. It was called the Help America Vote Act. It had provisions in it for things like expanded lists of IDs to cast a ballot. It also allowed for provisional voting, so if you showed up somewhere and your name was not on that list, you at least still got to cast a ballot that day so that it could be checked into later. The two biggest pieces of that legislation that affected my daily duties were the requirement to outlaw the punch cards and buy new tabulating and voting technology, and for the states to stand up statewide voter registration systems, meaning the state would have a list electronically of every voter eligible to vote in the state. Now, Colorado was blessed at this time with a slate of inventors and forward thinkers. We embraced change. The biggest development that came next started in Larimer County, Colorado. Scott Doyle was the clerk and recorder there, and he envisioned a system where his voters could come to any voting center and cast a vote. Voting centers would allow people to cast a vote near where they were inside their county, not necessarily only near their home. The other beauty about voting centers is that we still had our older voter registration law in place, so you had to vote on the precinct and ballot style that you lived at 30 days ago. Instead of sending somewhere, potentially clear across the county, to go to their old polling location to check in, we could take care of them at these voting centers and not make them traipse across the county. After the development of voting centers, it was either strategy or pure luck that it came to be just before our statewide voter registration system got off the ground in Colorado. We were fully implemented in 2007, and that voter registration system was robust. It allowed us to conduct elections by all-mail ballot when it was a nonpartisan election. It allowed us to do polling places. It was still in the law. We could embrace voting centers for the conduct that we chose. It had everything in it that we needed in the state of Colorado. I'm sure it was a challenge for those software developers. And because of all that variety and all that choice, it started to cause some confusion. Campaigns struggled to strategize on when to hit particular voters with their message to pull them to their way of thinking, when each county was doing something a little bit different. While Mesa County employed voting centers for partisan elections, our neighboring county might have stuck to polling places inside precincts. While Mesa County on nonpartisan elections delivered our election via mail ballot, our neighbors may have, again, stuck to precincts and polling places. This caused frustration for the citizens as well, because in one election they got their ballot by mail very conveniently delivered to their home, and arguably in a more important election like a gubernatorial or a presidential, they had to physically go somewhere to vote. So the legislation came forward after that to create a permanent mail-in voting list. This caught on like wildfire. By 2012, in Mesa County alone, over 70% of our voters had signed up for this, to have their ballot delivered to their home in a convenient way, no matter what type of an election it was. This was common across the state of Colorado, so we as administrators knew that the Colorado voters preferred to vote by mail ballot. It became the majority of the ballots cast, and then the state's focus moved to securing the mail ballot system. We went through a number of revisions and came out with a very solid system based on signature verification. Each and every ballot that we receive through the mail is compared with the signature that's on the ballot envelope to the signature that was submitted last to the Elections Division on your voter registration file. This is some material from the Secretary of State's material that they put out to train election judges and election officials how to detect differences from one signature to another. Not only is it based on humans to look at this and make their determination, but we also have signature technology that has come forward in the state to ensure that we are counting only valid votes that come into us by mail. After this legislation passed, then some of the most sweeping and dramatic changes happened. In the fall of 2012, the people of Colorado elected a democratically controlled Senate, House, and governor's office. And that fall, well, actually it was winter, December of 2012, We, as the executive board of the Colorado County Clerks Association, were invited to the table, and I'm very thankful for that. They sat us down and they told us their initiative would be to create a state that had same-day voter registration in it, and that the system that we had on that day would be more accessible to Colorado voters when they were through. And they had the votes to pass it. Same-day voter registration was not something that appealed to me at first. I am one of 3 Republican clerks that stayed at the table and worked through the legislation with the legislators, the interest groups, and my fellow clerks. I'm glad that I did, and I ended up being a supporter of same-day voter registration, if you can believe it, by the end of the process, because, first of all, we were already doing a form of voter registration same-day voter registration in a very inefficient manner. It was called emergency registration. Secondly, this made it to where you were voting on what happened in your new home, not voting on what mattered to you at your old home. So that makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? If you're going to move to a new home, and let's say that there's a tax initiative on that ballot for the fire district that's going to protect your new home, and you're going to have to pay that tax, don't you want to vote on that? So those 2 things sold me. The other thing that helped me stay on board is that they really listened to us, and we were able to bring on things like more frequent updates from the Department of Corrections and Department of Health so that we were removing the felons and the deceased off the list more timely. We were able to influence the bringing in of postal service data so we weren't delivering mail ballots to out-of-date addresses during an election, saving money and increasing security. The cleanliness of the list was important. So after that legislation passed in 2013, we have the model that we have today. It is consistent between types of election and counties. We have an all-mail ballot delivery system in Colorado. If you don't get your mail ballot, or if you choose not to use it, you can go to one of any of our voting centers speckled across the state, inside your county, access a ballot and cast it. And our tabulation equipment, yet one more time, was updated recently. Former Secretary of State Wayne Williams passed rules that required Colorado counties to only purchase one type of voting equipment. This type of voting equipment captures an image of a ballot and creates an electronic cast vote record as it's tabulated. And so for the first time in our history, we are being able to do the very best type of audit. We can literally compare the electronic result with what the human eye and mind would interpret that vote to be. Our practice is called risk-limiting audit. And here's a picture of Secretary of State Williams and some folks from Denver looking through boxes and batches of ballots to find the randomly picked ballot the Secretary of State gave us to go find. When we go find that ballot, we then compare what we see on that ballot for results with what was delivered to the Secretary of State as election results. The practice is very solid. It's statistically sound. We are the first state in the nation doing such an audit. This summer, we held an event in Denver. Secretary of State Wayne Williams hosted it, and it was an election security event. Homeland Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen was there, and she gave us accolades for our dedication and our hard work to make elections a priority in Colorado. I hope that you feel more comfortable with your system today after hearing this speech than you did when you walked in here. And another awesome headline that we got happened on May 10th, 2018, from the Washington Post. The headline read, "How Colorado Became the Safest Place to Cast a Vote." You know, there are jurisdictions across this nation that are just now getting their head wrapped around mail ballot voting. So Colorado is far in the lead in conducting good, solid, reliable, transparent, and accurate elections. I have been blessed to have been a part of it and for this to have been a big part of my career so far. And I am so thankful to have this opportunity to tell you about it today.